what's your secret? You got the kind of vibe that leaves one speechless. It could be model multitasking genius. Yeah, you got it all.
Welcome back to Breakthrough Conversations with Rhoda and Company. This is where we have what? Real conversations that help you grow, lead, and break through. So today's conversation hits at the core of leadership, the shift from control to credibility. Early in his journey, our guest, many leaders believed they needed to stay close to everything, every decision, every detail, every outcome. But over time, that approach creates bottlenecks and it limits ownership and holds teams back. But our guest today is Patrick Clayton, and Patrick is a senior sales leader with a proven track record of transforming underperforming markets into top revenue producers. He builds high performing teams through clarity, accountability, and trust. His leadership voice is grounded, practical, and focused on what actually drives results. So today we are talking about what it really takes to lead in a way that scales, moving from control to credibility, creating clarity, building teams that take ownership, and guess what? Deliver. So let's get into it. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you for having me, Rhoda.
I'm so glad you said yes. Thanks for joining. I would love, in the short amount of time I've gotten to know you, I'm very impressed with your background and the way you even present your presence exudes leadership. Can you tell me your story, your journey? How do you get to where you are today? And then talk to me a little bit about how would you describe your leadership style?
Well, I would tell you this, we don't have enough time to talk about my whole journey. It's been a long one and quite an interesting one, but I would tell you, I am one of six. I have five siblings.
Hmm.
I'm actually a twin.
Really?
And yeah, I am. And so grew up in a single, parent household. My mother raised us all. And, like many, that lack of a father presence left a lot of
Hmm.
gaps. My
Hmm.
mother worked very hard in the school system. And there was just so many times I saw other families, how much other, some of my friends were able to do because they had both parents in their household.
Hmm.
And I wanted that life and I wanted
Hmm.
more. And so it was just something in me that really stuck out that said, hey, it's up to me to
Hmm.
really pave the way for where I wanted to go. And so,
Hmm.
I worked hard, I studied hard,
Hmm.
and it was in college that I had an opportunity to go work as for a IT company at a
Hmm.
help desk, and just was able to really hone my skills with a leader that took some interest in me. And
Hmm.
so um, that leader really positioned me to learn more about a corporate presence in
Hmm.
the business overall. And so when I became a data analyst, that's when I became an absolute very passionate about
Hmm.
operational excellence and just diving into numbers, diving into
Hmm.
data, diving into the customer experience, being able to get into corporate training, and it just took off from there.
Hmm.
So I had a very successful career there, and I knew operations was where I wanted to be because I wanted to make a difference
Hmm.
for individuals because I really learned early on that individuals don't make great companies. Companies
Yes.
don't make great individuals. And so I wanted
No.
to be someone that impacted people's lives in the workplace. And so
Hmm.
my career is taking me up, down, backwards, and back forward, as
Right.
many have said. But now I find myself in a very, very good place to impact
Hmm.
teams and people at a high leadership level.
That's amazing. And I love how you took us back to your childhood and your upbringing and the environment in which and the situation in which you were brought up because that matters. That
It
shapes our
does.
point of view, it shapes who we are, and it puts that resiliency in us. And I love also that you mentioned there was a leader that took an interest in you. It's always someone that took an interest in us and they took the time to pour
Yes.
into us. So would you say that that's how you lead today? How would you describe your leadership style?
You know what? It goes back to that root.
Mhm.
That is my leadership style, which really involves um, taking care of people. At
Mhm.
the end of the day, I really say I'm in the people business
Yes.
because people drive a business. So I care about what's important to people. And I often use this acronym, and this is really what
Mhm.
my leadership style is.
Mhm.
It's communication,
Mhm.
it's accountability, it's responsibility,
Mhm.
and it's creating an inclusive environment. So that
Yes.
spells care,
Care.
CARE. So
Yeah.
when you care about people and you also incorporate those ideas, you get a very, very effective team.
That is so true. Human centric leadership, because at the end of the day, we're all human. I love that. So early in your career, I saw an article that you wrote on LinkedIn and you talked about early in your career and this concept of control. So early in your career, you leaned into control. What did that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I was a leader at a very young age, probably
Mm-hmm.
at the age of 23. I had a call center. There was like 85, there were about 85 agents in this call center. And now I'm a leader.
Right.
And you know how it goes. Folks looked at me as, hey, here's this young individual,
Mm-hmm.
this young male, and I felt like I needed to demand respect
Mm-hmm.
rather than
Mm-hmm.
earn it. And so it came in a sense of, authoritative. I need results. It came in
Mm-hmm.
a sense of, hey, do as I say.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is what I asked you to do, and I expect it to be done. Even to the extent of, hey, I wanted the best numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like I wanted to get out on the call center floor sometimes to help
Mm-hmm.
push the numbers
Mm-hmm.
because I was really good at what I did. And
Mhm.
so I learned that that was a sense of control. I
Mhm.
wanted to control individuals. I wanted to control the outcome because success to me, I felt like it was in my
Mhm.
hands that someone else
Mhm.
wasn't going to do it for me,
Right.
that it was going to take me to get it done.
Right. And this is what one of the motivators for me in even focusing on leadership is because I desire to get to the younger leaders in front of them and get to the emerging leaders so that they don't have to make some of the same mistakes that you and I made, because I was the exact same way. Very results oriented, driven, and oh boy, I think back over that, and my employees got the brunt end of that. I was never not kind, but I, if I knew what I knew now, they would have had a better experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some people miss that it doesn't always mean that you're not a kind
Right.
person.
Right.
It just means your mentality and your focus.
Yes. Yes. So when did you realize that approach was simply just not sustainable?
Wow. I learned that really quick in that same job in a call
Mhm.
center. It was some years later, and I remember getting called into a room. HR was in the room, my
Mhm.
manager was in the room, and I had a sit down with me, and they
Mhm.
said we need to talk about something very serious. And I was
Mhm.
accused of something, and basically I was accused of retaliating against another employee simply because of something that I didn't do.
Mhm.
And so immediately then it really hit me because they use those words
Mhm.
that you want the control, and so you use your power to try to influence someone to do something they didn't want to do,
Mm.
and that goes against our policy. And
Mhm.
I knew that that was not me.
Right.
But the sitting at the brink of potentially losing my job, those words really stood
Mhm.
out to me.
Mhm.
Um, and that's one of the things that I prayed about because that's not what I wanted my legacy to be.
Right.
And so it caused me to really shift and
Mhm.
start to do some learnings and talk to my mentor about how I could change some of those characteristics.
Right. You brought up a very important point for those that are listening. It's critical to have a mentor in your life. And it really doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've been in the workforce. We all need a mentor because sometimes we can't see outside ourselves. So then we have these blind spots and others could
Right.
help you see them. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, I had a similar scenario in my career that helped, jar me to say, hey, that's a different approach you can take. So, in the article I read that you wrote on LinkedIn, you say leadership is less about control and more about credibility. Break that down for us. What does that mean in practice?
So in practice, what it really means to me is it's about doing the small things.
Mhm.
Anyone can come in and try to narrate or control a situation to say, "Hey, listen, I want to be the best. I want to have the best numbers." And it's easy to create that facade or that smoke and mirror to
Mhm.
say, "Hey, I am the best." And often, I've learned that those that rise quick fall just as fast.
Mhm.
And so I built my career on less of trying to control the outcome and
Right.
more about building a solid foundation through the
Mm.
small things every day.
Yeah.
What are the things that you can get better at every day? Are you
Mhm.
looking at how engaged your people are? Are you giving them the tools? Are they trained properly? What are the process improvements? How do you create inclusion to get everyone into their input and their buy-in
Mhm.
to change? So change management is also going back to those people
Mhm.
so that they're the ones that are going to help influence change.
Right.
And it's up to me to set the strategy. And so it's just being able to do that day in
Mhm.
and day out,
Mhm.
creating a systematic approach where
Mhm.
my philosophy, which I take this with me everywhere I go,
Mhm.
Rhoda, my number one philosophy is what's the right thing to do?
Right.
I'm always
Mhm.
going to do the right thing.
Mhm.
And if people focus on just doing the right thing, I mean, you do that day in and day out with all of those little tasks,
Mhm.
it adds up to long-term results.
Right. That is so true. The small moments, and those are moments that matter. It makes me think of that quote, the small victories add up. And over time, you have something really great. And you mentioned, when you said that, it made me think of the word intentional. You must be
Yeah,
intentional about what the experience you want to give, what's the legacy you want to leave, and are you doing the right thing, like you said? That is so true. So when
yeah.
people aren't intentional and they aren't asking themselves, is this the right thing? What are the real costs of trying to control everything as a leader?
Um, you lose the room.
Mhm.
And the room is it can be your customers,
Mhm.
often it's your employees, it can be even leadership above you, it
Mhm.
can be everyone around you. You lose that when you're not listening to the voice,
Mhm.
and so that's why it's important to stay connected to your people
Right.
authentically, like you stated earlier,
Mhm.
and intentionally,
Mhm.
so that you can learn them. Be
Mhm.
genuinely interested in what they're interested in,
Mhm.
because people can tell from a mile
Right.
away when you're not interested, when you're just giving lip service. And so
Right.
it just shows up in those areas where then you see a lack of performance. You
Mhm.
see a lack of people really giving their best effort when
Mhm.
there's more in them. You see it from the client relationship. Communication goes
Mhm.
quiet. We talked about that before.
Right.
How people go quiet and then you
Mhm.
just see them start to withdraw,
Right.
and that's relevant from people you look up to, senior
Mhm.
leaders, to employees, to coworkers,
Mhm.
and to customers as well.
That is so true. So the cost isn't just impacting you as the leader. Like you said, you lose the room. You I like to say you lose a vote of confidence. And when you lose that vote of confidence, it's a doom feeling. And it's hard to come back from that. So you are impacted, and then you're impacting the team, the individuals in the team, because of your style of leadership being centered around control versus trust versus credibility versus clarity. You are depriving those individuals of the opportunity to grow and glow. So,
Agreed.
spot on. So, what if you were coaching some emerging or leaders who are green? What are some daily behaviors that you would tell them or advise them to do to build credibility with their team?
Well, the first thing that I tell people is be relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Being relatable doesn't mean that you have to know about each and every person, that you have to
Right.
be able to relate to the person older, younger. different genders. Being relatable means that, you're getting from behind the desk to make yourself available for communication.
Mm-hmm.
I say making rounds, every day to speak to, coworkers or your team. And even sometimes virtually, I get on my team's chat in the morning and I hit up coworkers and say, "Hey, good morning. How is your day
Mm-hmm.
going?" This is still a form of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's number one. Number two, I always say in those conversations,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we know it's important to listen, but be one that wants to foster dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you want to foster dreams for someone, next thing you know, you're in the airport and you see, something that reminds you
Mm-hmm.
of a coworker or someone else, and
Mm-hmm.
you pick it up, right? It may be a
Right.
snow globe. I had an employee, their favorite is a snow globe. And next
Mm-hmm.
thing I'm like, wow, you know what? I
Right.
know she would like that. And
Mm-hmm.
next thing you know, it's like you really thought of me.
Right.
Or you may have heard someone
Mm-hmm.
mention a book
Mm-hmm.
and you buy it for someone, and you
Right.
never know how you change or impact someone's life by
Mm-hmm.
that small thing.
It's
So
so
I
true.
always say be listening so that you can also foster dreams.
That
Those
is
are
so
those are my
true.
top two.
That is so true. That's very similar to how I interact with the teams I've led as well. You meet people where they are, and like you said, I could be out and I thought of this person. I knew that they once wanted to be a pilot, and so I bought them a little miniature airplane. And they was like, "Oh my God, you remember that I said that?" I was like, "Yeah."
Yes,
So that is so true. Again, human centric leadership, and people will remember that, and that makes a difference because people have to like you to want to work with you and for you, and to do their best work they need to have that sense of trust and feel that connection. So that is so true. So Patrick, how do you hold yourself to the same standard you expect from others?
oh boy. Listen, I learned I won't say very early. I actually learned it late.
Mhm.
But you know what? I have a very good board of directors. I
Mhm.
have a very good, circle of trust around me, and even outside of them,
Mhm.
I really seek to create a culture where it's two ways. So when I'm having
Mhm.
touch points with employees, not only am I having a touch point with them and we're talking about their progress, what may be some opportunities, I always ask, hey, what are some opportunities that you see with me? Am I
Mhm.
being the leader that you need me to be? I
Right.
ask that when I'm having a touch point, of course, with my
Mhm.
boss or a skip
Mhm.
level meeting with a senior
Mhm.
leader. And again, my circle of trust also knows me enough to where, hey, I look for honesty. Just be
Mhm.
honest with me. You notice something in a conversation I'm having with you, and
Right.
you notice that I'm thinking about it wrong or I have an
Mhm.
opportunity. I don't like the silence.
Right.
I want the honesty. I can handle it. I'm a big
Mhm.
boy. But I want to be authentic in how I show up and
Mhm.
intentional in that way. So I love to get that feedback on a regular basis.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're seeking out the feedback, you're being proactive about it, and you're modeling that it's okay to ask for it as well. Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Sometimes
one
people don't just give it.
no,
You do
you
have
gotta
to ask.
ask. Yeah, I do. I used to ask in my one-on-ones with my team, is there something that I do that you say, I wish Rhoda wouldn't do that. I just, oh, it irks me when she do that. And they would laugh. I'd be like, I'm serious. Let me know, because I know me, and I know how sometimes I have a big personality. I can come off a certain way. So they would over time build trust, and they felt safe enough to give me the feedback, and I'll be like, that's fair. Yep. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it
That's a
helps.
part of the credibility
Yeah.
component.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I read in your you had a couple of articles out there. You talked a lot about clarity. And where do leaders fall short when it comes to creating clarity?
It, I find often most you fall short when you're
Mm-hmm.
not aware of your own bias.
Mm.
You have this vision about the way you see it. You have
Mm-hmm.
this vision about the way, the norm is. And
Mm-hmm.
when you take an opportunity to say, hey, I want to have a lens of objectivity.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I have to say that I'm walking into this, have a lens of objectivity today, Patrick. And that is important because what it then often allows you to see is where there's a gap in understanding. Often
That's
we
so
find when
true.
we're looking at a process, when we're talking to an upset customer, when you're talking to an employee that may be upset, there's often a lack of clarity
Mm-hmm.
through most importantly communication. And that's why care works because it really ties back to the communication, accountability. Did you give the responsibility, as a leader,
Right.
and what type of environment are you a part of? And so when you can really hone into that,
Mm-hmm.
that's where the uncertainty really comes from.
That's true. So then how can a leader recognize that they've not been very clear and that they've created a bottleneck? What are the signs?
Well, that's a really, really, really good question.
Mm-hmm.
First sign that a leader um, should take in understanding that there's not clarity when the process is not smooth,
Mm-hmm.
when people are asking you questions, or
Mm-hmm.
when people are asking questions. Period. Sometimes they don't come to the leader to ask questions,
Right.
but when you're circling the floor, when you're
Mm-hmm.
listening, you can tell when the team is asking questions or people are asking questions. How
Mm-hmm.
many emails did you see when you sent out your communication? How
Mm-hmm.
many responses did you see? And then what are you seeing in the results? Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm very results driven.
Right.
And when you're not seeing, what you're supposed to see in results, go ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, when you go ask questions, often you will find, and when you seek understanding, that there may be a gap. And say, okay,
Yes.
maybe I wasn't clear. So I start looking here first
Mm-hmm.
and say, hey, what did I not do that
Right.
potentially make this unclear?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then tell me, what was your second question?
It is. And then what are the signs that they're creating a bottleneck, meaning that they're
Uh,
controlling? Mm-hmm.
yeah, and really, that is where the bottleneck is because
Mm-hmm.
you create the bottleneck when you see the leader keep moving forward,
Right.
and often you see the leader keep moving forward, and then you hear the words, "Well, that's not working.
Mm-hmm.
All right, team, we're going to shift." And you're not seeing the results.
Right.
The results are typically the first sign that says, I got a bottleneck somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for leaders sometimes to see if they're the actual bottleneck. That's why
Right.
having a a culture where people can give you feedback
Mm-hmm.
internally and externally is important because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times you may not see it.
Right. That is so
And then
true.
you realize that you're the actual bottleneck,
Mm-hmm.
trying to control the outcome,
Right.
running the race. And you look backwards and you're like, well, where's everybody else?
And they're sitting somewhere probably scared to ask a question now because you likely suppressed all of that out of them, and or
Yeah.
they're stuck somewhere because they don't have the clarity.
I've gotten that feedback before,
Really.
unconsciously. I'm communicating something. I'm passionate about getting the results.
Mhm.
And sometimes I don't even know what my tone sounds like.
Right.
And so now I'm like, man, that was a great meeting. And you get off and you wonder, why aren't you seeing results? Why aren't you hearing something?
Mhm.
And then I often go back and say, hey, what did you hear me say?
Right.
And
That's a
that's
good
the clarity
tactic.
part.
Yeah.
Right. What did you hear me say?
Mhm.
And then I get feedback. Well, let me tell you that you were a little harsh. And then it's like, was I? And so then that gives me an opportunity to go back and gain
Right.
clarity with the team.
Yep. It's good to also have somebody, one or two somebodies that you have that type of relationship with, and you can put them on notice to say, hey, I want you to pay attention to how I'm delivering this message, and then go back and get the feedback. That's true. I remember when I was part of a high performing leadership group, and it was quite an honor to be selected to be part of it, and through it you were going to be developed. And so part of that process was we had to take a battery of psychological assessments, and it was my first time ever taking them. And I remember meeting with the psychologist at the company where we took these assessments when he was sharing my results. And one of them was around lack of clarity and communication.
Mm.
And I was like, that's not right. I said, I be communicating. And he said, bro, it's not that you don't communicate. He said, the data shows that I get really excited about whatever the thing is, and I have this vision in my head. I
Mm,
share my vision in my head and I tell them what I want to happen, but you're not really clearly giving them the picture. So you assume
that's
that
right.
they could, see what's in your head. So over the years, because of that feedback, I've been very conscious of that. So I probably
Yeah.
over communicate now. But yes, I've had that struggle.
I'm sure you've been able. Someone's told you along the way,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm this way. I'm thinking in my head, like you stated.
Yes.
Listen, I've mapped out the whole process
Right.
in my head. Now I'm talking to someone, and they're
Mm-hmm.
looking at me, and they say, "What are you
Right.
talking about?"
Right.
You know, it's all up here, and it's like, wait, you
Yeah.
know what? Let me provide some clarity. Yeah,
Right. Let me give you some context. Yeah,
that's
that's
right.
so true.
That's right.
So sometimes we think that we've identified the problem with our teams, but it could be just surface level. So how do we get deep and making sure we're getting to the root cause underneath what some of those issues may be?
You know what? You really have to find those influencers on your team.
Mm,
Understanding who your influencers are is very key, especially as a leader to get into the surface level.
right.
So you mentioned the word earlier, focus group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to create a focus group within the
Mm-hmm.
team to be able to understand. Will you be honest with me?
Right.
But in that, it takes them understanding, are you being honest with them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you're fostering a two-way communication, an honest environment with your
Right.
team, then you got to get down to the frontline level, and wherever that base is, that's where you know what's really going on. It's not
Mm-hmm.
typically at a high level.
Right.
It's really who's doing the work, and when you
Mm-hmm.
go out there, are they being able to communicate with them and dialogue? How was your weekend?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Talking about the simple things.
Right.
You'll often find when you're ready for that challenging, question,
Mm-hmm.
they'll tell you.
They will.
But people don't always volunteer it. That's
Mm-mm.
why being good at asking for
Yes.
you for what you want, what you need, will get you the information that you desire.
I don't want to end our conversation without talking about the word accountability. So,
Hmm.
because some people think you must control to foster accountability, and you can have a high accountability, but high empowerment, high
Yeah.
freedom, high psychological safety. So, how do
Mm.
you and how have you balanced accountability without slipping back into control?
I go back to what you say,
Mhm.
honesty. What I
Mhm.
said earlier. That's how I foster
Mhm.
accountability, honesty, because that's what accountability ability is. Let's be
Right.
honest with each other. Let me be
Mhm.
honest with you
Mhm.
about what I'm seeing. I want you to be
Mhm.
honest with me about what you're seeing.
Right.
So when you build the credibility,
Mhm.
now you foster an environment where you can be honest. And
Right.
when you do that consistently, now you have a track record of trust.
Mhm. Mhm.
So now when you're communicating, they're understanding, okay, Patrick's not here to attack me.
Right. Right.
Patrick's just giving me the information,
Mhm.
right? And this is where emotional intelligence comes into play.
Right.
Being able to understand, don't speak emotionally,
Mhm.
speak factually. What is the
Right.
data driven decision? So, therefore, if I'm given facts and I want to hold you accountable,
Mhm.
it shouldn't be opinionated.
Right.
So, if you trust me,
Mhm.
and I've built a psychologically safe environment, as you
Mhm.
stated. And I've built credibility through consistency.
Mhm.
Now, those data components that I'm giving you,
Mhm.
they should line up to something, whether
Right.
they're true or not, and
Right.
say, hey, how can we agree? So then,
Mhm.
gaining alignment
Right.
creates accountability,
Mhm.
and then doing it together. Because if you let them know that they're not in it by themselves, but
Right.
hey, I'm here to help, and what can I
Mhm.
do to remove any barriers for you?
Right.
Then it makes accountability easier as
It
well.
does. It does because it's not a punitive environment. Mhm.
It's not always a write up.
Right.
That's what I
Right.
tell people. It's not
Yes.
always a write up.
Right. Yeah. Well said. So, Patrick, I can talk to you all day about this topic. I do have a rapid fire round. I want to ask you a few questions and I want you to answer whatever comes to mind first. So, one of them is
Okay.
one behavior that instantly builds credibility.
Honesty.
Yes. Being honest, being transparent, no matter what. Sometimes it's hard for people to be honest because they're afraid or they assume that there's going to be some type of conflict. And
Correct.
we talked about in the leadership legacy cohort that we've been doing about courageous conversations, have the courage to do it. And because you care about those people and their growth and their success, you will be. So,
That's
one
right.
leadership habit that destroys trust.
Isolation.
Mm. Last week, the guest Whitney was on, and she talked about one thing that leaders shouldn't do is hoard transparency. That what
Yep.
you just said made me think of that because it's like they do things in isolation and not including the team. Yep,
That's right.
there's no trust. That is so true.
Yes.
One action a leader can take this week, one action they can take this week to create more clarity on their team.
One action a leader can take to create more clarity on their team. I would say that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that came to mind, you said the
Mm-hmm.
first thing that came to mind is partnership.
Yes.
Partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Say, hey, would you read this for me?
Right.
What did you get out of that?
Yeah. I kind of felt you were going to say that, but like ask questions, be
Yeah.
proactive. Yeah, that's so true. And then the final question I'll ask you is if every listener made one leadership shift after this conversation we had today, what should it be?
Um, care about people.
Make it human
Mm,
centric.
It
Make it about the
doesn't
people.
matter.
Yeah.
Make it about the people. You
hmm
know, at the end of the day, businesses are businesses, but you can't do anything without others. And that's
Right.
what my tagline, we're better together. Care about people.
Yeah. So Patrick, do you offer like any mentorship, any coaching outside of your team, outside of your day to day, your 9 to 5, or only your team gets to experience Patrick?
Actually, interestingly enough, here in the last, I would say, 2 years,
mm-hmm.
I have really challenged myself and gotten outside of the box. Someone told
Mm-hmm.
me, they say, you know too much to be just hoarding
Right.
it to
Right.
just your team. And so I have several individuals that I've coached and mentored, and it
Mm-hmm.
is selective.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a lot of experience, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. And so, again, I use that word if you have to ask.
Yes.
So if
Yes.
you ask me, you can hit me up on
Right.
LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Always open to having a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and sharing any knowledge and any coaching that I can provide.
Well, I really appreciate you saying yesterday, and I thoroughly enjoy this conversation. And I bet your team thoroughly enjoys working with you. And it's not often, I'm going to go there, it's not often that I've seen in my career African American successful man in a leadership role. So I just find it so refreshing. And like I said, just being around you in the short amount of time that I have been, you exude this presence, and it's so nice to hear that is at the heart of it is because you have empathy and a deep passion
Yes.
and care for others, and that in your story, the way you were raised and your mom working hard and being a single parent household and all the things that I'm sure come with that, because that's my journey as well, that you've had to overcome, it helps build that
Yes,
empathy. So thank
it
you
sure
for your
does.
service. Thank you for your
Thank you.
leadership. Thank you for caring. So this was real. This is a strong reminder that leadership is not about holding everything together. It is about building people who can. So when
That's
your
right.
credibility is strong, your team wins. You win, and your team will lean in. They take ownership. They raise the bar without you having to push it. They they will rise to the occasion. So to everyone listening, take one thing from the conversation and apply it this week. That is how your leadership will grow. So thank you for tuning in to Breakthrough Conversations with Rhoda and Company. Patrick, thank you for joining. And to our listeners, your breakthrough begins with how you lead. Thank you for listening.
Hey, what's your secret? You got the kind of vibe that leaves you speechless. It could be model multitasking genius. Yeah, you got it all. Hey, what's your story? A kick-ass mom and 40 under 40. A soccer practice in your high heel glory. Yeah, you do it all.